the recorded video, and I forgot to hit go live right before our Zoom started. So I'm just going to say a few words to that version of the video. You guys will receive it in an email that I send you later. But hey, everybody, you already know I'm starting the YouTube live stream here. This is our first day of class meetings. We're going over epistemology vocabulary, and the first term that we're all studying and learning about is the word proposition. Okay, good. So proposition, it's the meaning of a sentence. Now, you might see that definition and think that's a little weird. Why isn't it just saying that it is the sentence? Well, there's actually a slight difference between a sentence and the content of the sentence. And I'll try and explain that through an example here. So let me come around to the other side of the board. All right, so I'm going to write two sentences right here on the board, two different sentences. First of all, this one says, the snow is white. Okay, and another sentence I'm writing below says this. Der Schnee ist weiß. Okay, the snow is white. Der Schnee ist weiß. We have two sentences, and even if you don't have like knowledge of the language German, there are a lot of cognates. You know, English is kind of a Germanic language, so maybe you can make the quick inference that I'm hoping you'll see. There are how many sentences here? Well, there's definitely two. There's two different sentences. They're spelled differently. They sound different, different symbols. But how many propositions do you think are written right there? Yes, it's just one, correct. And what's the reason why that it's one? Why is that the answer?
There's only one subject.
Sort of. Right, what do you mean? You want to say more?
Like, it's just, there's only snow. Like, everything is addressing snow, so that's like...
Ooh, okay, not exact, kind of, but there's a little more specific point I'm trying to make here. It's not just the word snow that's the same. They both mean the same thing. They have the same information content. You see what I'm saying? Because one's just in German and one's in English. But they're not saying different things. They mean the same thing, right? Der Schnee ist weiß is just the German statement for the snow is white. So although there's two different sentences, which are in different languages, they have far different sounds, different spellings, they do have the same meaning. And so they express the same propositional content. That's the same proposition expressed in two sentences. We can also imagine, even in the same language, one in the same language, two unique sentences that express the same proposition. Like if I tell you that I live in Long Beach, that's logically equivalent to saying Long Beach is where I live. And I just switched the subject from being me to Long Beach in the two examples there, but they express and they convey the exact same content. So the propositions are the meanings of sentences. And the reason we're starting with this is because it is propositions which are the objects of our knowledge. They are the things which we either know or do not know. So, you know, like we know or do not know that the sun is the star that we orbit around, or we know that we don't know the proposition that we are the third planet from that sun, or we know or we don't know the proposition that the earth is round. So propositions, that's fundamental. Those are the things that we take propositional attitudes toward, like believing, disbelieving, knowing, or not knowing. Okay, now, hopefully that's clear. If there's ever questions or something you'd like me to go over or sort of discuss in more depth, that's fine. Just let me know. But the first thing to know here is that a proposition is the meaning of a sentence. And as an example here, we have two sentences which convey the same proposition. Okay. You know, it's interesting when you think about language in that way, because when you realize that different sounds can convey the same information, it really lets you understand how there's a total arbitrariness to the symbols and sounds that we have used, that we have designated to convey the meanings that we have. You know, looking around the world at different world languages, you know that far different sounds and symbols can be used to communicate the same information. And imagining different possible worlds, you can imagine even far more alien type sounds that would reflect and convey the same information. So there's nothing essential about the sound of these sounds that I'm making to you that convey the ideas that you're now understanding. They can and they are conveyed by other symbols and sounds. Okay, next up, we started with proposition, and the order of these terms that I'm going to reveal to you are in a certain logical order because the previous definition helps to define the next one coming up. So what's next is the concept of truth. Okay, so truth. There are propositions that are true, and there are propositions that are not true. But what do you think it means for a proposition to be true? to be a true one? What does it mean for a sentence or a proposition to be true? Think about it. It's something that it seems so obvious, but it takes a moment to really fully get out there.
That
So-
the proposition isn't false.
Well, yes, but that's circular, isn't it? To say it's not false is to say it's like not true. But we need some substantive meaning behind that. I mean, you are correct, of course. If it's true, it's not false. But what affirmatively can you characterize in an affirmative way does it mean for a sentence to be true, rather than saying it lacks the quality of being false? What do you say?
Verifiable.
Huh?
It's verifiable.
Verifiable. Okay, James, let's go with your suggestion. Now, I'll say this. Usually, whenever I ask this question in the beginning of an epistemology lecture, that's the kind of answer I usually will get because it seems intuitive and I can understand that. But it's not actually quite correct, and here's why. Although being verifiable gives you evidence that something is true, like if you can verify it, you have a solid reason to believe it's true. There can be things that are true even if nobody has any verification for them, okay? Let me give you like a random hypothetical scenario here. You ever watch true crime? Well, whether you have or not, just imagine this. Suppose somebody commits murder, they kill somebody, and then they dispose of the body in a way that no one will ever find this body. You know, they melt them down into ash, scatter it into the ocean, and they're just gone. Okay, so the victim and their family members, they don't know what happened to this person. They are thinking, did they commit suicide? Did they get lost? You know, did they get into an accident or something and no one ever found them? We don't know. But in my hypothetical, what's the truth about what happened to the person?
They were murdered.
They were murdered. Now, does it require that we can verify it for that to be true? No. I mean, often you can verify it if you find the evidence, but it could still be a fact, couldn't it? Even if nobody knows about it, right? So truth doesn't necessarily require that any believer or any person is aware of the truth. It just requires that it be true. So in that way, what would you say is the meaning of the word truth? Because it can't be about verification. Otherwise, we would say it's impossible for something to be true if no one can verify it. But clearly that's not the case. There could be aliens in outer space right now. I can't prove it, but it very well could be true, since after all, here we are, and we're aliens on the planet Earth, aren't we? So what do you think? What's the definition of truth? If it's not about being able to be verified, think of the example I just gave. Like this person's body is gone and they were murdered. That's true. What does it mean then that it's true, if not that it can be verified?
Does truth refer to the state of reality?
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much, Miles. That is correct. Yes. So truth is just when the proposition mirrors the facts of reality. And that is sometimes called the correspondence theory of truth. That's the dominant idea of truth in philosophy and in the West. That what truth is a match between the meaning of the sentence and then the facts of reality. So let me put that here. Truth. It is when what a proposition says matches the facts of reality. When what a proposition says matches the facts of reality, that means it's a true proposition. So if I say to you I'm wearing glasses, it's true. It is true. There you see, there's the fact. But if I told you I'm wearing a hat, at least right now, that's false because it's something I'm saying, it's a proposition, but it doesn't line up with what's happening in reality. So people can say or report anything, but it's not going to be true unless it mirrors what's real. If I told you I was 100 years old, false. That's just not the time that I was born. If I told you I was born in the 80s, this is true, and that's just because that's the real decade in which I was born. So a statement has a truth value, as we say in logic. And the two truth values are truth or falsehood. And the truth value of a proposition is determined by the facts of reality. So every articulate sentence has a truth value. It's either true or false. If I told you that, California is the capital of the United States, that would be a false statement because it doesn't match the officially designated capital of the United States, which is DC. Okay, so that's, I hope, coming clear to you guys, not to make the point too belabored, but truth depends on a correspondence between the sentence, its content, and then the reality. Jill, you have a hand up? What's that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So what about statements that have like a future value? So like you said, for example, like
I am 100 years old. Yes, like you're not 100 years old,
Mhm.
but what if someone says I will be 100 years old? I know that, like sometimes like people may not live that long, but in
Yeah,
terms of,
sure. No, you're asking a good question. So sometimes people say that propositions that are tensed into the future don't have a true value yet because the facts that will make them true have not yet occurred. So if I say to you, like, tomorrow it will rain, even if that's in the forecast, maybe some say that the statement can't be considered true because it hasn't happened yet. On the other hand, different people that analyze the concept of truth would say that it's possible for the future state of affairs to already exist if we live in a space-time universe where there's no such thing as presentism. So like Einstein's theory of relativity implies that actually all the moments of space-time exist, including the past and the future. And so if you have this kind of eternalist metaphysics, then you could say that there actually is a truth value to the statement, but you don't know what it is until it happens, right? Like, so already right now, there's a fact about what will happen tomorrow. And so if I tell you that, like, tomorrow I will teach a class because I'm scheduled to teach a class, I'm making what I think to be a very reasonable prediction, but it's not something that's happened yet. Nonetheless, in some metaphysical views, there is already a fact about it because the concept that the present is the only moment is an illusion. Does that make sense to you? So I can't resolve that controversy. Is the future real already or not? Depending on your answer to that, you might have two views. Either that there's no objective truth value to future statements yet, or that there is, and it depends on that metaphysical view of reality. Okay? Good question. Very good. So, truth, when what the proposition says matches the facts of reality. Saying to you that the earth is round, it's true. Saying that it's flat, that's just not the shape of the planet, so it's a false statement. Okay, we're going to move on to the next term in our vocabulary list here. And once again, you're going to see how the next term is going to piggyback and build on the last one. So I'm going to ask now, what does it mean to have a belief in a proposition? What is a belief? So say that I believe a proposition. What does this mean? To believe a proposition is to think what about it? Someone will give me the answer, or at least try. And let me see what you have.
That is true.
Sorry, you say what?
If you believe it, then you are to assume it's true.
Very good. Yes, that's right. So to believe a proposition means that you, the subject, you at least individually think that it is true, or you agree that it is true. Okay, so belief. When a subject, is that too technical? When a person, let's just say that. When a person thinks that a proposition is true. So when they think it matches the reality, then they believe it. Okay. Now I said person. I mean, at first I said subject. Really, subject probably is the better term in a sense because there can be maybe non-humans like animals that you don't think of as persons. They might have beliefs of some kind. But anyway, keeping it with us for the moment, when a person thinks that a proposition is true, yes, that means that they believe that proposition. So say that somebody's convinced that their partner's cheating on them, and they take this proposition: my partner is being unfaithful, and they think that's real. I believe that. Like, I believe that. That's what I think is true. Then they talk to their friend, and their friend is like, no way, you're just misjudging them. You don't know their heart. They're not like that. I don't believe that is true. So take one sentence. Jones is cheating. Individual A thinks, yeah, I agree. I think that's really happening in reality. Individual B says, no, that's a statement, but it doesn't mirror what's happening. I don't think that has happened. So they disagree about whether they think this is true. They have different beliefs. Now, notice something interesting. Beliefs are subjective to the individual because two different people can disagree about one proposition's truth value. Like, you can have one person that says, I believe the earth is round. Another person says, I don't believe that it's round, like a flat earther, right? And so there's one statement, the earth is round, and they're on two sides of it. One agrees, one doesn't. But even though beliefs are subjective, the truth itself is objective, right? Because it can't be that there's both a round planet and also it's flat. There's one shape objectively to the outside object, outside of your mind. And so you either have the correct belief about it or you don't. So beliefs can be true or false, but of course, truth is just objectively true. When you have a false belief, that means that you think something is happening in reality, but it's really not. So, I mean, if a child believes that Santa is going to deliver their gifts, they have a false belief in their mind. They think something's going to happen or something is real, and it's not. So our goal, I guess, usually in life is to try and fill our mind with a bunch of true beliefs, because by definition of truth and belief, If you have a lot of false beliefs populating your head, that means you're out of touch with reality. You're disconnected from the way things really are, you know? So if people, I don't know, deny facts or they don't understand what's true, then they're kind of living in a false conception of reality, and that's not good. But anyway, so far, here's what we've done. We've talked about a proposition. It's the meaning of a sentence. We've said that propositions can be true or false. When they're true, that means they match the reality, irrespective of whether we have the evidence yet. And a belief is when a subject thinks that a proposition is true, which of course, in many cases, people don't always agree on everything. Even take the question of God's existence. You know, God exists. Theists say, I believe that. Atheists say, no, I don't think that's really true. Okay, next. So we've got to add one or a couple more terms to our growing vocabulary list here. The next one is justification. Okay, justification. So what do you think it is to have a justified belief as opposed to it being not justified? And this is what we're talking about with justification here. So it's a word, I'm sure it's probably been used by you before. You have some at least general idea of it, just living in our world. What could it be to have a justified belief? What
A
is this?
belief with evidence.
Very good. Okay, good. Now we're getting to the concept of being verifiable, having evidence and stuff. Yeah. So justification is when you have good evidence to support what you believe, right? So good evidence or reasons. Having good evidence or reasons. Having good evidence or reasons, kind of the same, for your belief. Let me say this. To support your belief. Okay, so if a belief is justified, then there's solid evidence and reason to support it, to back it up. Suppose that the person thinks that their partner's cheating, right? But they have justification. What could that be? I don't know. Maybe they looked at their phone and they see a bunch of like strange text messages to a person that are like romantic and they don't know who those are to. So they're like, well, your text messages that's evidence. I have justification that you're cheating. Or they see that they have like lipstick on their collar or something. They've been not coming home at the proper hour, saying that they're staying late at office, whatever. These facts could be taken view of by somebody who's suspicious of that. And then they could say, here's justification. I don't know. I can give you many more examples. Maybe somebody thinks that their package was stolen because they received a notification on their phone that it had been delivered. When they get there, it's not on their doorstep, but they see footprints in the snow that lead away from the doorstep where the package would have been. So seeing those footprints, they come to a conclusion, my package was stolen, and it's justified perhaps based on the evidence that they've got. A clear case of using evidence to form beliefs is in legal contexts, of course, because for a person to be convicted of a crime, as you know, there has to be some kind of substantial evidence that convinces the jury beyond reasonable doubt of the case of guilt. So, you know, the things that they might bring into exhibits in the courtroom, like, hey, look at this DNA evidence. Look at the fact that he's made these statements before that indicate a motive. Look at this photographic evidence that shows him casing out the scene in a few days before it happened. Look at this evidence that shows that he bought a weapon that's consistent with the weapon used. That sort of stuff gives justification for anybody that's watching to come to the conclusion that Jones is the killer or whatever. So justification is when you have firm, solid reasons, evidence to back your beliefs. Now, can it be that people have beliefs that are not justified? Sure. That happens all the time, sadly. You know, people believe things maybe because they hope they're true or they sound cool or they want them to be true, but there's no evidence at all. In other cases, a person can have a justified belief that turns out to be false. Now, that's not the common case. Usually, when your beliefs are justified, that leads to a greater likelihood that they're true, but it's not a 100% guarantee. Certainly, sometimes people can have justified beliefs that turned out to be false nonetheless. Can anybody think of a scenario like that? Somebody had really good evidence to believe something, but it actually was misleading evidence. Can you think of any type of scenario of that kind, whether real or imaginary? I mean, there are definitely cases like that, but let me see if you have a thought.
I believe there's a hypothetical involving a clock that's set at the wrong time.
Oh, so, right. Russell's clock. Yeah, so Bertrand Russell had an example like that. And I'll fill in the details if you don't mind. So like say that somebody looks at a clock, which is sitting, you know, on the wall or on a table, whatever, and they look at that clock and it shows a certain time indication. They might then believe, based on seeing that the clock shows that is the time. And suppose that the clock is broken. Well, there's different versions of the case, Adam. In one version of the case, the clock happens to be correct, actually. And that's kind of like a Gettier case, which we'll develop next week. In the case where the watch doesn't work, but it happens to show the right time because you looked at the broken clock at the one moment when that was the time of day, then you'd have a justified true belief, but it would still not be knowledge because of the unreliable way that the belief was formed. On the other hand, suppose that the watch was showing the wrong time and you just weren't aware of what time of day it was. You still might say you have a justified belief by relying on the watch because normally it worked, or in the past it always worked. But now it's reporting the wrong time, so that would be a belief that's justified but false. Miles, what?
Is there a sort of qualifier for what counts as good evidence?
It's really it is a bit ambiguous, I guess. So there's this one philosopher that did a lot of statistical analysis and game theory. His name is Bayes. And Bayes says that it just has to be something that increases the probability of the proposition being true. So, if I think that Jones is the killer and then I gain evidence that, his fingerprints are all over the murder weapon, then that evidence raises the likelihood that the belief based on it is true, the belief that he's guilty. But can I say more about what the evidence, about what the probability of truth raising property really is? It's a little bit hard to put the finger on, but intuitively, in a common sense way, we all know how to weigh evidence, right? Like we do it all the time, informally and in formal contexts too. If you want to know, for example, what kind of food your friend likes, then you might just observe the way they behave. And you might say, okay, well, I see that they never order spicy stuff, so I can kind of judge that these are a cuisine that they don't like. And that would be your evidence based on observation. So sometimes evidence comes from observation. Sometimes it comes from testimony that we hear from other sources. Sometimes it comes from inference. Sometimes it's derived from a combination of perception and memory. But all the different sources of evidence, when they're good, they give solid grounds to believe something. Yeah. I mean, what counts as solid grounds can vary by the context and by the case, I would say. So yeah, having good evidence or reasons to support your belief. Maybe I can throw out a few other examples of a justified but false belief, like someone's framed for a crime that they did not commit. Of course, that's happened in history. And suppose that the evidence that's planted leads all the investigators to come to the reasonable conclusion that so-and-so is guilty. But because it was a clever deception, this is a justified but false belief. Anyway, keep in mind, the justification tends to lead us towards the truth. That's why we want to have evidence in the first place. Why would we care about having evidence if it systematically led us to the falsehood? So, although it's not perfect and it doesn't work in 100% of cases, justified beliefs have a greater chance at being true. And that's why we seek out evidence and we try and insist on evidence when people tell us things. We don't just say, sure. We say, well, what's the proof for that? And then if they can prove it, we think it's more reasonable to believe. Okay. Now, one more epistemology vocabulary item, and then we'll build some more concepts from here. The next one is just epistemic agent. Epistemic agent. I feel like this one it's philosophically interesting, but it's pretty easy to explain. So this is just a being that is capable of having either beliefs or knowledge. Okay. Okay, it says epistemic agent, that is a being that is capable of having beliefs or knowledge. Okay, so not everything in this universe is an epistemic agent. In fact, it's very rare, it's very special. So even just being one is pretty cool. Let's kind of dive into this more. See the marker that I'm writing the notes with on the whiteboard? What do you think? Is this thing an epistemic agent? This marker? Something that can have beliefs or knowledge? Yay or nay?
No, but it's a tool used by one.
Sure, yes, I'm using it. But just focusing on it itself, it's certainly not an epistemic agent. Now, I'm sure, it's abundantly obvious why. Can anybody just say why? It's not an epistemic agent? Because why?
Inanimate.
It's an inanimate object, right? It has no perception, it has no consciousness, it has no like central nervous system. So it's not peering out into the world, forming judgments about it, taking in data. It doesn't have the ability to see, taste, touch, hear, smell, or anything else. It is an inanimate object, so it clearly has no consciousness, and therefore it can't form beliefs. It can't have a point of view on anything around it. But are you and I epistemic agents? Surely, yes. And the difference is clear because we have a mind that can judge, that can affirm, that can deny, that can observe. And so we are epistemic agents, and it's kind of interesting to be because if you look at the universe in total, it's just a bunch of dead matter, you know, not much life, if any, aside from the planet Earth. And so it's a high privilege, isn't it, to be an epistemic agent in this universe because most stuff is just not living matter, just out there occupying space according to the laws of physics. So we are these epistemic agents. We are not just objects, but subjects. We think, we judge, we decide, we believe, and we know. Are there any things that are not human beings that are epistemic agents? What do you say? Just a question. What do you think? Could there be? Are there?
Animals? Can certain
Animals? Sure, I would say that's right, Camille. You know, so like maybe they don't know the same amount of things as us. We're very highly advanced, right, as intelligent life forms. Certainly animals don't know that we're the third planet from the sun, or they don't know that the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, or anything really about the history of the world or events. They don't know the periodic table of elements or the Pythagorean theorem, but they know some things probably, right? When there's danger, when there's a source of sustenance or food, when there's something that provides them with an opportunity to reproduce, or maybe when, you know, if it's a pet, when they're about to be fed or when they're about to be taken out for a walk. So animals would have a run of knowledge far short of ours, but they are at least beings with a consciousness. So maybe they have the ability to at least have some rudimentary beliefs. I would say that's fair. Could there be non-human persons outside the planet Earth that have the status of an epistemic agent? Perhaps, but we just don't know that. Okay, so anyway, we're epistemic agents. We've talked about belief, truth, justification, and propositions. Now, I'm ready to tell you a little bit about what the ancient Greek account of knowledge was. So in the first written accounts in the West of knowledge, some of these conditions that I've just now mentioned to you were combined together to form the concept of knowledge. And what they said was this: knowledge is a, ready for this, justified true belief. Justified true belief, okay? And sometimes epistemologists like to abbreviate things using acronyms. And so I've seen this acronym utilized, that K, the letter just standing for the word knowledge, is equivalent to JTB, where JTB stand for the three components: justification, truth, and belief. So for you to know something, say the Greeks, and really not just the Greeks, but this view of knowledge dominated for thousands of years, for 2,000 years really, or more, that in order for you to know, you have to meet all those conditions. So first of all, you have to think something is true, that's believing it. But that's not enough by itself, because say you think something's true and it isn't, then certainly that doesn't count as knowledge. So a second requirement is that the thing that you think is true actually is true and correct. But even if those two conditions are met, it's still not enough for knowledge if you don't have evidence or justification to support this belief that you have. So suppose you believe something and it's correct and you have good evidence. Now, under those circumstances, we can say that you have knowledge of that proposition. But if even one of the conditions is not satisfied, then that's not a case of having knowledge. Okay, so let me just try and make this somewhat intuitive to you, the ancient classical account of knowledge. So suppose that a student is taking like a multiple choice test in one of those classes, and the question that is written is, when was the Declaration of the United States, Declaration of Independence of the United States signed? And so there's four multiple choice options for our student, and A is 1776, B is 1876, C 1976, and D 2030. Now, the student rules out D because it's history and that's the future, so that doesn't work. But they are just totally lost in terms of what the real answer is. So they look at the three responses, A, B, and C, and they just say, okay, I don't know, I'm going to go with B, 1876. Now, did that student know the answer to the question? Did they have knowledge when they filled in 1876? as the date and year of the Declaration signing? Simple answer. Did they know it or not? No, they didn't. And what's wrong? Why did they not know it? What's wrong with their belief, or what is wrong with their answer? Which condition is it failing?
They don't even believe it. Like, it's failing all the conditions.
I was kind of not going with that, because they do believe that the answer they gave is the correct answer. It's just not correct. So what's really missing?
The justification part.
Well, there's that missing too. But I was focused mostly on the most basic part. It's the wrong answer, guys. It's not correct. It's not true that the Declaration was signed in 1876. We're clear on that, right? I wasn't just focused on the fact that he's guessing. Let's know our history. 1776 was the date and year. So he got the wrong answer. No one would say he gets the right answer just because he believed something. It's incorrect. And you don't get credited for knowledge when the belief you have is false. Okay, so if you believe that the sun orbits the earth, is that knowledge? No. And it's not knowledge. Why? Once again, you could just say.
Because it's wrong.
Because it's false, because it's incorrect, okay? Could there be a person that really sincerely believes it? Yes. In fact, generations of people believed it before Copernicus and Galileo, but none of them knew that the earth was at the center of the solar system or universe. It's not possible to know that because it's simply incorrect. In the same way, could anybody know that I, Professor Vulich, am 100 years old? Is it possible for someone to know that about me?
No.
No, and the reason is simply, again, because it's false. So you can't know a false statement. At best, you can what when it comes to a false statement? You can't know it, but you could, I guess, what?
Believe it.
Believe it, right. You could think that something which is false is true, but that's not counted as knowledge, because if false beliefs were given as knowledge, then everything would be knowledge. When the student writes in the wrong answer, we would say, yeah, it's false, but it's still knowledge because, whether it's true or false, it's all knowledge one way or the other. No. Knowledge is when the person's belief is correct, when it's true, when they get the answer right, in other words. So having a belief which is false, even if it's based on great evidence, that's not enough to have knowledge. Now let me give you another example, okay? Let's go back to our student taking his multiple choice test. He sees the responses that are optional for when the Declaration was signed, 1776, 1876, 1976, 2030. So take the second student. He rules out D, as we said before, and now this student's thinking this, okay, 17, 18, 1976, I'm really just not sure. But I'm 17 years old, and that's my lucky number, and so whatever, let me fill in A. Now, this is a different version of the case. In this case, did the student get the right answer? Yes, they did, but did they know the answer? They didn't know the answer, and so what condition's missing here? Certainly they believe something true, but now the problem is what?
Justification.
Right, they had no evidence or reasons that this was the correct answer. It was just based on a random hunch or guess. So even though they happened to get the right answer, they didn't really know that answer. Now, who knows the answer to the question? It's the student that doesn't just fill in the right bubble, but the student who fills in the right bubble for the right reasons, because they know all the facts and reasons that establish that as the correct historical date. So lucky guesses are not knowledge. When you guess that a person has an even age, like in terms of number of years, you have a 50% chance of being correct. But we can't say that you really know it until you've heard some kind of evidence that backs up the claim, that gives you a more firm reason to believe, So like right now, I could say there's an even number of people on the campus of Chapman University. I mean, I'm sure there's some people, staff and whatever, facilities management right there. And there's a 50% chance that I'm correct, but do I really know that sitting here saying that? No, because I haven't conducted a census of it and the rest. I guess I could have knowledge of that proposition if subsequent to counting up all the heads on campus, I saw that it was divisible by 2. But just sitting here back, in a chair in a remote location, it might be a belief that's true, but it wouldn't be knowledge without better evidence. Okay. In the same way, I have a belief, let's suppose that there's aliens in outer space, but I don't think I can say I know this unless and until better evidence comes forward to give us greater reason to think it's true. Okay. So in the ancient Greek account of knowledge, it's JTB. You have to have a belief in something, but it also has to be true. And even if it's a true belief, it still doesn't satisfy unless it's also got good evidence or reasons that you're aware of that inform you to have the belief. And the first reading selection that I sent off to you guys talks about this account of knowledge that was written about by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, and his main character in the dialogue is his teacher Socrates. So I want to say some more now to you guys about that dialogue, and this is like a two-part lecture on the epistemology vocabulary and the Platonic dialogue of the Minos. So whatever we can't finish today, we'll definitely just continue with it on Friday. But let me just sort of survey you guys really fast. Anybody know the just rough outline of the life of Socrates? Anybody has that knowledge or no? Nothing like it? Okay, well, fair. That's good. I actually like to tell the story. It's kind of like a little storybook trip down memory lane into history. So let me take you back in time. It's thousands of years ago. It's like 400 years before the Common Era. Actually, let me give you the precise dates here. So Socrates, widely considered to be one of the most important philosophers in Western history, in many ways, forefather of Western philosophy. He lived from 469 until 399 BC. Okay, so why is it that the date at the end of his life is a smaller number than at the beginning? Because he was born before the Common Era, 469 years before the events and the life of the early Christian era and Jesus Christ. So he lived for 70 years, and the years get closer to year zero as he's aging. Now, he had a student, and the student is who writes all these dialogues, and that's Plato. Plato's a few generations younger than Socrates, and the dates for his life were 428 BC until 347. So you can see he was born 41 years after Socrates, and he lived about 50 years later. Now, let me tell you about Socrates' life. It's just going to be just kind of a quick crash course in the life and death of this man. So in ancient Athens, Greece, where he lived, there was a town square, and Socrates would like to sort of set up in the town square and just talk to people from all different walks of life and from different backgrounds. This town square of Athens would be like the equivalent of like the modern day downtown area of a metropolitan city. So you'd have people engaging in commerce, socializing, and there would be people entertaining you and stuff. And like what Socrates did is he would set up a little spot in the town square, and he would just engage people in dialogue and discussion about any number of different topics. And he had this great talent and skill for opening people's minds and for getting them to change their views about the things that they thought they really understood very well. So he's an older guy now, like he's lived a long time, and he's acquired this, reputation in the community for being just a witty conversationalist who's able to change people's views or at least get them to reconsider. In one example, like he'll talk to anybody, people that are high up in the Athenian government, members of the military, all the way down to just everyday folk. In one example, he's talking to a Greek general, and like a Socratic conversation could go like this. The general says, I think that justice is just might makes right. So whoever has the most power, they get to dictate what right and wrong is. And by the time Socrates finishes this back and forth Q&A kind of dialogue with them, the guy leaves the conversation saying, never mind, Socrates, you've convinced me that it's acting in accordance with virtue, according to like noble principles. That's what justice is. So it was impressive to a lot of people that he could do this. There's actually a word that was coined to refer to Socrates' distinctive method of inquiry and dialogue, and that is the word elenchus. So that is the word for Socrates' distinctive method of critical question and answer. It kind of like gently lead people to new intuitions through asking them questions that would supply intuitive answers, leading him on and on until he could finally get them to see things differently. One of the reasons that Socrates had this famous reputation was back in ancient Athens, Greece, there was this cultural superstition that if you talk to certain people that had insight into like the underworld and to the spiritual world and the gods, that they could predict the future for you or tell you like your fortune. These were sometimes called oracles or blind seers. In many cases, they were people who were like congenitally blind from birth. And in their culture, they believed that they were endowed with like powers of observation and judgment that surpassed normal individuals. So he went to the oracle at Delphi one time, Socrates did, And the oracle said to Socrates, Socrates, I have a vision that's true about you. You are the wisest man in all of Athens. And Socrates found it to be such a strange comment because he's so humble and he never professes to be wise. So he says, how can I be wise? I don't know anything. And what he learned afterwards is that it is actually because he says that he knows anything that he's the wisest man. Because everyone else thinks that they know something when they don't. And Socrates is the only person who knows that he knows nothing. And so for that reason, he's got the one item of knowledge that everyone else is missing, whereas everyone else thinks they have knowledge but don't. Socrates was unique in knowing that he knew nothing. Anyway, so that's the kind of background that gives him this status in Athens as this great conversationalist and a rhetorician and orator. Now, because of his reputation, there was a following that he developed of these younger guys, a couple generations younger than him, and they would like to go to the town square and just see Socrates engage in discussions with people because they thought it was so cool and inspiring how he would challenge the received wisdom of people in their society and be willing to make arguments and dialogue against people with settled views. So that was inspiring to a group of young people, one of whom was Plato. So Plato now is like one of these younger disciple followers that kind of just listens to Socrates and tries to take notes. Socrates himself never wrote anything down. The only reason that we have all these surviving accounts of what he said and did in his life are because of the writings of Plato primarily and others in the Athenian culture. Socrates believed just in talking, and so it's really a great debt of gratitude we owe to Plato to preserving all these works. Okay, so not everybody, though, in Athens liked what Socrates was doing in the town square. In particular, the Athenian government officials, they were actually threatened by him. They feared that he was causing the youth to somehow become more open-minded, independent, and they thought Socrates is actually a corrupting influence on the youth. If they listen to him and they start, thinking outside of the box too much, questioning everything that they think they know, maybe they'll stop believing in the Greek gods. Maybe they will no longer obey our customs and traditions. So some people in the Athenian government said, we need to shut Socrates down and stop him from practicing this philosophy, whatever he calls it, in the town square. So they sent a messenger to him with an ultimatum, and they said, Socrates, here you are ordered to stop doing this stuff in the town square and practicing philosophy. But if you don't follow this command, we're going to press charges against you. We're going to come arrest you next time, okay? Now, Socrates himself was defiant on that because he's righteous. He's like, I'm not doing anything wrong. Far from it. To the contrary, I'm actually improving the intellectual health and vitality of Athens. So he thought that this was a completely unfair, unjust demand placed on him. So he continued practicing philosophy. And sure enough, the government knew that. So they made good on their threat and they came and arrested him. Now, just so you know, Plato, who wrote about a lot of the events of Socrates' life, he always uses Socrates as the main character, or most of the time he uses Socrates as the main character who speaks in these writings he has. And the account of Socrates' trial that I'm going to talk to you about next, that's in one of Plato's dialogues, which is called the Apology. So if you ever want, you can maybe read the Apology if you want to have further studies in ancient Greek philosophy, and you'll get the full rundown of all the little subtle details of how the trial proceeded. Anyway, it's kind of an ironic title, the Apology, because as it says, you'd think someone's saying they're sorry or begging for mercy. But Socrates was far from apologetic. He was defiant to the last. So when the court proceedings happened, here's how they went. In ancient Athens, they did have a criminal justice system which relied on jury trials like we have in our modern criminal justice system. But it was a little different because whereas we have, I think, 12 people that are impaneled into a jury selected from the community, in Athens, they would try to get as many of the adult male citizens to participate as possible. So it'd be like a big gallery auditorium style seating with like hundreds of adult men that would weigh in as jurors on a case. So there'd be like community-wide involvement. And the rule that they had was the accused gets to present their defense, the state gets to present their prosecution, and then after the arguments on both sides, the accused person was given an opportunity to plead for a counter penalty, like something that would be a little less than what the state wanted. And that would normally be the part where the accused person would like appeal to the mercy of the jurors in the court. They would say, as an example, in another case, suppose that the state wanted to impose like a sentence of 10 years hard labor on somebody for a crime. And so they defended themselves. They try to say they're not guilty. But then at the end, they say, gentlemen of the jury, I'm innocent. But if you do find me guilty, I would humbly request that you minimize the sentence from 10 years of hard labor to something more fitting, like 5. So normally they would try to finesse that middle ground by proposing a counter penalty that was less punitive, but still severe enough to indicate to the whole court and the jurors that they were taking it seriously, right? But when Socrates got up there, so he gets up in front of the jury and he says all this stuff. He's like, look, everyone, this is a total fraud. This is a witch hunt against me. I've done nothing wrong. I love Athens. I served in its military. I've raised my children here. It's everything to me. So how can you say I'm not patriotic about Athens? I'm not teaching these kids and these young people to not believe in the Greek gods. How could I? Because I believe in them too. So it's all just fake, made up allegations. It's based on innuendo and it's all sensationalized. I've done nothing wrong. But he says, look, if you do find me guilty, okay, if these arguments fail and you still find me guilty, let's go ahead and talk about the counter penalty. The state wants to execute me. That's the death sentence. So that's the most severe penalty possible. And Socrates is like, he stands in front of everyone and he says, so if I'm going to propose a counter penalty, it has to be less than death. That's way too much. So if it's supposed to be fitting for my quote unquote crime, here's a better penalty that matches what I've actually done. How about instead of death, you ready for this? Free lunch for the whole rest of my life at the Auditorium Cafe of Heroes in Athens. That's what I deserve as a quote-unquote penalty. You understand me? Because maybe you haven't been listening. You punish people for doing things that are bad and wrong. I've done nothing bad and wrong. I deserve a reward. So if you want to give me a sentence me to free lunch for the rest of my life in this honored hall of heroes. So like, not only is it free lunch, but which is of course a reward instead of a penalty, but the hall of heroes is supposed to be reserved for like noble citizens of Athens, military members that have served nobly and stuff like that. So he's asking for a high honor, and it's a way of thumbing his nose at the whole court and what they're doing to him. Anyway, the jurors go back, they deliberate, and they return a guilty verdict. So he's been convicted and condemned now to death, and he's going to be sentenced to be executed. But there's one more little plot twist in the story. I guess I'll have to leave you in suspense, and we'll cover that at the beginning on Friday. And then on Friday, we'll work further as we talk about the dialogue of the Meno and how it establishes this ancient Greek account of knowledge, justified true belief. So that was really it for today's meeting. Hopefully everything's coming through, and I think we had a good interactive class period. If you guys need anything, just feel free to email me. But after today's meeting later today, I'll message you the link for the Friday class as well as for the Friday office hours. And then, of course, next week we'll finally be in person, so that'll be good. Is everything all right? Let me know if you want to say goodbye before I close the stream. I always like to wait until I hear some people saying goodbye. I don't want to hang up on anybody. So are we good?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. Have a great one. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, again, thank you guys, and I'll see you and talk to you soon.